There's a haunting truth hidden in the words of the writer William Gibson, who once said, "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed." Imagine a world where the mere act of predicting an event could set it into motion, where belief itself becomes the architect of destiny. This is the mysterious power of self-fulfilling prophecies, a phenomenon that has woven itself into the fabric of countless civilizations, shaping the course of history in ways both profound and unsettling. From the oracles of ancient Greece to the seers of medieval Europe, prophecies have not just foretold the future, they've actively created it, bending reality to match the expectations of those who believed in them. Think about it. What if the future isn't something we passively await, but something we unknowingly summon through our own convictions? Across time and cultures, prophecies have acted like invisible hands, guiding kings to war, empires to collapse, and ordinary people to extraordinary fates simply because they were convinced these events were inevitable. It's a chilling idea, isn't it, that a whispered prediction could ripple through centuries, gaining strength with every retelling until it becomes undeniable truth. Today, we're unraveling 25 of these eerily accurate prophecies, each one a testament to the strange alchemy of human belief and its power to shape reality. Picture this, a prophecy so compelling that an entire civilization rearranges itself to fulfill it, or a prediction so precise that it sparks the very events it describes. From the fall of mighty empires to the rise of legendary leaders, these stories blur the line between fate and free will, leaving us to wonder, did the prophecy foresee the future, or did it create it? As we journey through these tales, you'll encounter prophecies that defied logic, defied time, and even defied the boundaries of culture, appearing in distant lands with uncanny similarity. So settle in, because what you're about to discover isn't just history, it's a mirror held up to the human mind, revealing how deeply our beliefs can alter the world around us. The question is, once you know the power of these prophecies, will you ever look at the future the same way again? King Croesus of Lydia stood at the crossroads of destiny, his empire's fate hanging on the words of the most revered oracle in the ancient world, the Oracle of Delphi. Rich beyond measure, he sought divine assurance before marching his armies against the rising power of Persia. The prophecy that echoed back to him was deceptively simple. If you cross the river, a great empire will fall. Certain of victory, Croesus took it as a sign that Persia would crumble beneath his might. But the gods, it seemed, delighted in ambiguity. When his forces crossed the Halys River and met disaster, the empire that fell was his own. This wasn't just a twist of fate, it was a masterclass in how prophecies manipulate human psychology. Herodotus, the father of history, recounts how Croesus's unwavering belief in his interpretation blinded him to other possibilities. The oracle's words weren't a prediction, they were a mirror reflecting back the king's own assumptions. Had he hesitated or sought clarity, history might have unfolded differently. Instead, his certainty became the engine of his ruin. Ambiguous prophecies thrive on this very human tendency to hear what we want to hear, to bend vague words to fit our desires. The Oracle of Delphi was infamous for this, her riddles a double-edged sword that could elevate or destroy those who sought her counsel. For Croesus, the prophecy became a self-fulfilling trap, his confidence morphing into hubris as he marched toward a fate he himself had set in motion. This pattern repeats across time, revealing a chilling truth. The most dangerous prophecies aren't the ones that spell out doom in clear terms, but the ones that leave just enough room for hope to mislead. Croesus's story is a warning, a reminder that when we stake our futures on the words of oracles, we might not be reading the future at all, but writing it ourselves. And as we'll see, this dance between prediction and persuasion is only the beginning. The story of Oedipus is perhaps the most chilling example of how a prophecy doesn't just predict the future, it orchestrates it. Before he was even born, the oracle at Delphi warned King Laius and Queen Jocasta of Thebes that their son would grow up to murder his father and marry his mother. Horrified, they did what any desperate parents would do. They bound the infant's ankles and left him to die on a mountainside. But here's the cruel twist: their attempt to defy fate became the very reason the prophecy came true. A shepherd rescued the child, delivering him to the childless king and queen of Corinth, who raised him as their own. Years later, when Oedipus learned a similar prophecy about himself, he fled Corinth to avoid harming those he believed were his parents. On the road, he quarreled with a stranger and killed him in a fit of rage, unaware that the man was Laius, his true father. Sophocles' tragedy captures the unbearable irony of Oedipus's journey. The more he struggles to escape his destiny, the tighter the prophecy's grip becomes. When he solves the riddle of the Sphinx and earns the throne of Thebes, he unwittingly marries Jocasta, his mother, fulfilling the very horror he sought to avoid. The brilliance of the play lies in its relentless tension between choice and fate. Every decision Oedipus makes, every step he takes to outrun the prophecy, only pulls him deeper into its trap. This raises a haunting question: was the prophecy always inevitable, or did Laius and Jocasta's fear, and later Oedipus's own, create the conditions for its fulfillment? Greek mythology suggests a terrifying answer. The gods' words aren't merely warnings, they're blueprints. The moment Laius heard the prophecy, his actions became part of its design. His panic, his cruelty, even his secrecy, all of it wove the threads of Oedipus's tragic fate. What makes this story endure isn't just its dramatic irony, but the uncomfortable truth it reveals about human nature. When we're told something is inevitable, do we unconsciously align our choices to make it so? Oedipus's downfall wasn't written in the stars, it was set in motion by the very hands that tried to erase it. And as we'll see, this pattern isn't unique to Greek myths. Across cultures, prophecies gain power not from divine magic, but from the weight we give them. The next tale takes us to a kingdom where a single vision of fire and blood reshaped an empire, not because it had to, but because everyone believed it would. The Vikings didn't just fear the end of the world, they trained for it. In the frozen halls of Norse mythology, the prophecy of Ragnarök wasn't a distant doom to dread, but a call to arms. Imagine a battle so vast it would swallow the gods themselves. The great wolf Fenrir breaking free, the serpent Jörmungandr rising from the sea, and Odin falling to the jaws of chaos. Yet what's fascinating isn't just the prophecy's vivid imagery, but how it shaped an entire culture. Norse warriors believed their courage in battle could postpone the inevitable, that each act of bravery might stall the final hour. And so, ironically, the prophecy designed to warn of destruction became a reason to seek it. This wasn't passive fatalism, it was a self-fueling cycle. The more Vikings embraced the idea of Ragnarök, the more they lived as if it were already coming. Raids, conquests, even the glorification of death in battle, all were twisted into acts of defiance against fate. Historians note how this belief system blurred the line between cause and effect. Did the prophecy inspire their relentless warfare, or did their warfare make the prophecy feel inevitable? The answer, perhaps, is both. Ragnarök's genius lies in its cyclical nature. Unlike linear apocalypses, it promised rebirth after destruction, a new world rising from the ashes. This wasn't just an end, but a reset button, giving meaning to struggle. Compare that to modern doomsday predictions, where climate change or nuclear fears often paralyze rather than motivate. The Norse model flipped the script. Their apocalypse wasn't a reason to surrender, but to fight harder. Yet the deeper lesson here is universal. Whether it's ancient seers or modern preppers, end-time prophecies have a way of becoming self-fulfillment machines. When people believe catastrophe is coming, they act in ways that nudge it closer, hoarding resources, stoking conflict, or in the Vikings' case, sharpening their axes. Ragnarök wasn't just a myth, it was a mirror reflecting back humanity's knack for weaving its own destiny from the threads of prediction. And as we'll see next, this pattern doesn't just shape cultures, it can elevate an ordinary man to the status of legend. The year 2012 wasn't just another year. It was supposed to be the end of the world, at least according to a tidal wave of media frenzy that twisted an ancient Mayan calendar into a global doomsday prophecy. The truth, the so-called end date of December 21st, was simply the close of one cycle in the Mayan long count calendar, akin to a cosmic odyssometer rolling over. But when modern culture got hold of it, this astronomical footnote became a full-blown apocalypse script. Survivalists stockpiled canned goods, Hollywood churned out disaster blockbusters, and conspiracy theorists mapped every possible catastrophe, from planetary alignment chaos to a mysterious phantom planet colliding with Earth. The irony, the louder the prophecy spread, the more real it felt, proving that even in our digital age, ancient fears still hold sway. Psychologists call this the availability cascade, where repeated exposure to an idea, no matter how outlandish, makes it feel inevitable. News outlets amplified every fringe theory, turning niche speculation into mainstream panic. Retailers cashed in, selling everything from apocalypse bunkers to end-of-the-world party kits. In Mexico, tour operators offered luxury packages to Mayan ruins, promising front-row seats to history. The prophecy didn't just live in headlines, it reshaped economies and behaviors, showing how a 1,000-year-old calendar could hijack modern minds. But here's the twist. When December 22nd dawned uneventfully, believers didn't abandon the prophecy, they reinterpreted it. Some claimed the world had shifted to a higher spiritual plane. Others insisted the apocalypse was merely postponed. This mental gymnastics reveals something profound. Once a prophecy takes root, we'd rather bend reality than discard the story. The Mayan never predicted doom, we did. Our collective anxiety wrote the script, funded the merchandise, and even greenlit the movies, which raises a tantalizing question. Did the prophecy fail, or did humanity's belief in it, and the frantic preparations that followed somehow divert disaster? It's a paradox as old as prophecy itself. The act of preparing for an outcome can sometimes prevent it. Now, as we hurtle into an era of AI and deepfakes, this ancient dynamic takes on new urgency. If a misinterpreted calendar could spark global panic, what happens when technology gives ancient fears a megaphone? The next prophecy shows how quickly digital whispers can spiral into real-world consequences, proving that the line between prediction and persuasion has never been thinner. In ancient China, heaven wasn't just a place, it was a political weapon. The mandate of heaven wasn't some vague spiritual idea. It was the ultimate legitimacy test for emperors, a divine report card that could make or break dynasties. Picture this, a ruler's right to govern hinged not on armies or wealth alone, but on whether the cosmos itself seemed to approve. Floods, famines, even strange celestial events, these weren't just tragedies, but potential signs that heaven had withdrawn its favor. And once people believed the mandate was lost, rebellion wasn't just likely, it became inevitable. Take the fall of the Shang dynasty. For centuries, they'd ruled with iron fists until droughts and earthquakes began plaguing the land. The Zhou rebels seized on these omens, claiming the gods had turned against the Shang's cruelty. But here's the twist: the Zhou didn't just interpret the signs, they helped create them. By circulating prophecies of the Shang's corruption, some likely fabricated, they turned public perception into a self-fulfilling avalanche. When the Zhou finally overthrew the Shang, they didn't just win a war, they cemented the idea that power flowed from moral virtue, not just force. This cyclical dance of rise and fall became China's political heartbeat. Every new dynasty claimed the mandate by pointing to the failures of the old one, while simultaneously watching the skies for signs of their own eventual downfall. Emperors knew their grip on power depended on maintaining the illusion of heavenly favor. They'd stage elaborate rituals, build grand temples, and even rewrite histories to align with auspicious omens, because the moment peasants believed the mandate was slipping, the empire became a tinderbox. What makes the mandate of heaven fascinating isn't just its political cunning, but how it mirrors similar prophecies across cultures. Like the European doctrine of divine right, it tied leadership to cosmic approval, but with a crucial difference. European kings claimed God's grace was irrevocable, while Chinese emperors lived under the sword of Damocles, knowing heaven's favor could vanish overnight. This uncertainty bred a unique pragmatism. Dynasties didn't just collapse because they were weak, they fell because enough people believed they'd lost the mandate, sparking rebellions that made the prophecy come true. The mandate's legacy lingers in modern politics, where leaders still cling to narratives of inevitability and moral superiority. Because whether it's ancient omens or modern polling data, the lesson remains the same: power survives only as long as people believe it deserves to. And that's the dark genius of self-fulfilling prophecies. They don't need to be true to change history. They just need to be believed. It started with a death in the rain, a seemingly trivial detail that spiraled into one of American history's most chilling patterns. William Henry Harrison, the 9th President of the United States, gave the longest inaugural address in history on a freezing March day in 1841. Refusing a coat to prove his toughness, he caught pneumonia and died just 31 days into his term. But this wasn't just bad luck, it became the first link in a chain of tragedies known as the Curse of Tippecanoe, a 20-year cycle of doom for presidents elected in years ending in zero. The curse's roots stretch back to 1811, when Harrison, then a military leader, clashed with the Shawnee chief Tecumseh at the Battle of Tippecanoe. Legend claims Tecumseh's brother, a spiritual leader named Tenskwatawa, placed a curse on Harrison and future leaders elected in the same cyclical pattern. Whether the curse was real or fabricated, its power grew with each eerie repetition. Abraham Lincoln, elected in 1860, was assassinated in his second term. James Garfield, elected in 1880, was shot within months of taking office. William McKinley, re-elected in 1900, met the same fate. The pattern held like clockwork until it didn't. By the 20th century, the curse had seeped into the national psyche. When John F. Kennedy, elected in 1960, was assassinated in 1963, newspapers didn't call it random violence, they called it the curse's latest victim. The fear became so palpable that security protocols tightened dramatically. Presidents avoided open cars, public schedules were scrubbed for vulnerabilities, and the Secret Service's role transformed from mere protection to active threat prevention. The curse wasn't just folklore anymore, it was shaping policy. Then came 1980 and Ronald Reagan's election, when an assassin's bullet struck him just 69 days into his term. History seemed to repeat itself, but this time with a twist. Reagan survived, quipping to surgeons, "I forgot to duck." His recovery didn't just defy the curse, it shattered the pattern. Some argued modern medicine saved him, others credited sheer luck. But perhaps the real key was belief, or rather, the lack of it. By the 1980s, the curse had begun to feel like an antiquated superstition. The less people treated it as inevitable, the less power it held. This raises a haunting question: did the curse ever exist outside the collective imagination? Or did the very act of retelling it, of tightening security after each tragedy, create the conditions for the next one? The line between prediction and persuasion blurs here. When a society expects disaster, it often subconsciously arranges the pieces to fulfill that expectation. The curse's real power wasn't in Tecumseh's brothers' words, but in the weight they gained over a century of repetition. Modern leaders still navigate omens, though now they wear the guise of polling data and media narratives. The lesson of Tippecanoe lingers. Whether it's ancient curses or modern headlines, belief is the forge where prophecies are hammered into reality. And as we'll see next, sometimes the most dangerous predictions aren't about individuals at all, but about entire cities, where a single vision can alter the fate of millions. Rome's destiny wasn't written in the stars, it was bought by a king. The Sibyline books, a collection of cryptic prophecies, weren't discovered in some divine vision. They were sold to the last Roman monarch, Tarquin the Proud, by a mysterious old woman who burned 6 of the 9 volumes right before his eyes, demanding the same price for the remaining 3. Desperate for their wisdom, Tarquin paid, and with that, Rome's fate became intertwined with pages of deliberately obscure verse, consulted in moments of crisis for centuries to come. These weren't just predictions, they were political tools. When Hannibal's armies threatened Rome during the Punic Wars, the Senate turned to the books, interpreting their riddles as a command to bury 2 Greeks and 2 Gauls alive in the Forum. A brutal act, yes, but one that rallied the people's faith in their leaders' connection to the divine. The brilliance of the Sibyline system lay in its flexibility. Unlike fixed oracles, the book's meanings could be massaged to fit any crisis, their vagueness a feature, not a flaw. Need to justify a costly war, the books hinted at impending doom unless action was taken. Facing a plague, the verses surely pointed to neglected gods who demanded new temples. What's striking is how these prophecies functioned as a feedback loop. The more Rome relied on them, the more their authority grew, reinforcing the state's power. Priests appointed by the Senate controlled access to the texts, ensuring interpretations always aligned with political needs. This wasn't fortune-telling, it was statecraft disguised as divination. When a prophecy predicted victory, it bolstered morale. When it warned of disaster, it justified harsh measures. The books became a self-fulfilling engine, their words shaping the very events they supposedly foresaw. Compare this to modern governments leaning on expert panels or economic forecasts to justify unpopular decisions. The medium changes, but the mechanism remains eerily similar. Present an ambiguous prediction as absolute truth, and people will rearrange reality to match it. The Sibyline books didn't just guide Rome, they revealed how easily prophecy becomes propaganda when placed in the hands of those with something to prove. Empires rise and fall on such narratives. Just as Rome wielded its sacred texts, the next civilization will explore turn prophecy into an instrument of conquest, not through vague verses, but through a single, electrifying vision that launched 1,000 ships toward an unsuspecting city. The stakes, nothing less than the future of 2 legendary worlds. Moctezuma's hands trembled as he studied the report's pale men with beards like serpents, riding beasts no Aztec had ever seen, their weapons flashing like captured lightning. For generations, the prophecy had whispered through the temples. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god who'd vanished eastward centuries ago, would one day return to reclaim his kingdom. The year was one read on the sacred calendar, the very cycle of the gods' promised reappearance. And now, as if summoned by the stars themselves, Hernán Cortés and his conquistadors emerged from the eastern sea. The psychological trap had been set long before the first Spanish ship sighted the coast. Aztec cosmology wove time into a tight spiral, where history repeated in divine patterns. Moctezuma wasn't just a ruler, he was the guardian of cosmic order, trained to read signs in eclipses, comets, and stranger portents. When Cortés arrived bearing crosses reminiscent of Quetzalcoatl's sacred symbols, wearing armor that gleamed like serpent scales, the emperor faced an impossible dilemma. Was this the god's return or a cruel trick? His hesitation became the conquistador's greatest weapon. Cortés, ever the opportunist, leaned into the myth. He accepted the gold and jewels offered to Quetzalcoatl, not as tribute to a god, but as spoils for a Spanish crown. Meanwhile, his allies, the Tlaxcalans and other oppressed tribes, saw no divine aura around these foreigners, only a chance to break Aztec tyranny. This cultural fracture reveals prophecy's cruel selectivity. It paralyzes those who believe while empowering those who don't. By the time Moctezuma realized his mistake, Spanish steel and smallpox had already begun their grim work. The fall of Tenochtitlan wasn't just a military defeat, it was a cosmological collapse. When the Aztecs' own sacred calendar seemed to betray them, the spiritual foundation of their empire crumbled faster than their stone temples. Spanish chroniclers later claimed Moctezuma surrendered his kingdom willingly, framing the conquest as destiny. But recent scholarship suggests a darker truth. The emperor may have been held hostage, his submission staged to demoralize his people. The prophecy didn't enable the conquest weaponized the prophecy. This tragedy echoes beyond Mesoamerica. How many civilizations have faltered because they tried to force foreign threats into familiar myths? The Aztecs weren't naive, they were trapped by their own symbolic logic, interpreting invaders through a lens that blinded them to reality. It's a warning that resonates today as modern societies grapple with disinformation and ideological echo chambers. When our narratives become too rigid, they stop helping us understand the world and start making us vulnerable to those who would exploit them. Yet the story doesn't end with destruction. In a twist the Spanish never anticipated, indigenous communities began reshaping Christian doctrine around surviving Mesoamerican beliefs, blending Quetzalcoatl's imagery with saints and virgins. The feathered serpent didn't vanish, it went underground, resurfacing in rebellions and art centuries later. Which raises a provocative thought. Can a prophecy be so powerful that it outlives even the civilization that birthed it? Our next tale suggests an answer as we cross the Atlantic to a prophecy that didn't just survive colonization, it fueled a revolution. Theatre crews whisper it as the Scottish play. Actors avert their eyes when passing its costumes, and stagehands know better than to quote its lines carelessly. Shakespeare's Macbeth carries a curse so potent that even saying its name inside a theater is believed to invite catastrophe. This isn't just superstition, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy woven into the fabric of performance history. From falling stage waits to mysterious backstage fires, the play's legacy is riddled with eerie accidents, each fueling the legend further. Consider the infamous 1942 production starring John Gielgud, where 4 actors died during the run, including a coven of witches who allegedly cursed the cast after being fired. Or the 1953 performance in Bermuda, where a dagger meant to be prop struck an actor fatally, mirroring King Duncan's murder too closely for comfort. Even modern productions aren't immune. In 2001, a chunk of scaffolding collapsed during a performance in New York, injuring several crew members. The pattern is too consistent to dismiss as mere coincidence, yet too chaotic to pin on any single cause. What makes the Macbeth curse so fascinating isn't just the accidents, but the rituals performers invent to ward them off. Step into any theater and you'll hear the same remedy. If someone utters Macbeth outside of rehearsal, they must spin 3 times, spit over their left shoulder, and recite a line from A Midsummer Night's Dream to cleanse the air. These aren't arbitrary gestures, they're psychological armor. Anthropologists recognize this as apotropaic magic, actions designed to deflect harm by acknowledging the taboo. The more actors believe in the curse, the more they reinforce it through their own behavior. The play itself seems to court disaster, with its themes of ambition, betrayal, and supernatural manipulation. Macbeth blurs the line between art and reality in ways that unsettle performers. The witch's incantations, written with eerie authenticity, were rumored to be lifted from actual grimoires, while Shakespeare's depiction of regicide allegedly angered real coven members who cursed the play in retaliation. Whether these origins are fact or folklore hardly matters. The fear they inspire is real, and fear has a way of shaping outcomes. This curse thrives on anticipation. An actor nervous about stumbling over lines becomes more likely to do so. A stagehand distracted by thoughts of past accidents might overlook a safety check. The prophecy doesn't need supernatural power. Human psychology does the heavy lifting. It's the same mechanism that drives athletes to avoid stepping on baselines or sailors to dread whistling aboard ships, rituals born from the need to control the uncontrollable. Yet the Macbeth phenomenon isn't just about theater. It mirrors larger cultural taboos, from the ancient Greek fear of uttering Hades' name to modern avoidance of Friday the 13th. These shared beliefs act as social glue, binding communities through collective caution. When a stage manager scolds a rookie for saying Macbeth, they're not just enforcing a rule, they're initiating them into a centuries-old tradition where words hold weight and belief shapes reality. Perhaps the true lesson of the curse lies in its duality. It's both a cautionary tale and a celebration of theater's mystique. The moment performers stop fearing Macbeth, the spell breaks. But would the play lose its electric edge without that whispered dread? Like all enduring prophecies, its power hinges on the space between skepticism and surrender, where a single spoken word can summon chaos or prove it was only ever in our heads. According to Hindu cosmology, time doesn't march forward in a straight line. It spirals through 4 great ages, each darker than the last. We're living in the Kali Yuga, the final and most turbulent era before the cycle resets. Ancient texts describe this age with startling precision. A time when greed replaces duty, when leaders profit from suffering, when even the earth grows barren from humanity's neglect. But here's the unsettling twist. This isn't just a prediction of decline. It's an accusation. The Kali Yuga prophecy suggests we aren't passive witnesses to moral decay. We're its architects, our collective choices accelerating the very downfall foretold millennia ago. The Vishnu Purana paints a vivid portrait of this era: kings ruling like thieves, families fracturing over trivial wealth, sacred rivers drying to trickles. Yet modern Hindu scholars point out the prophecy's paradoxical power. By diagnosing societal illness, it also prescribes the cure. Across India, environmental activists invoke the Kali Yuga to rally conservation efforts, framing dying rivers and poisoned soil as symptoms of a cosmic imbalance. Farmers reviving ancient water harvesting techniques cite these texts, arguing that ecological stewardship can delay the age's worst effects. Even Bollywood films weave the theme into storylines, showing characters battling corruption as a spiritual duty. This interplay between prophecy and action reveals a fascinating cultural feedback loop. Unlike apocalyptic visions that encourage resignation, the Kali Yuga concept thrives on intervention. Ayurvedic doctors reference its warnings about declining health to promote traditional diets. Educators use its critique of shortened attention spans to advocate for meditation in schools. The prophecy persists not because it's inevitable, but because it's useful, a mirror held up to society's flaws with a built-in imperative to change. Parallels emerge in other traditions. The Greek myth of the ages of man traces a similar arc from golden virtue to iron-hearted strife. Norse Ragnarok's prelude describes brothers turning on each other for profit, echoing the Hindu texts. Even the biblical story of Babel warns of fragmentation through selfish ambition. What unites these narratives isn't just pessimism, but a shared understanding. Civilizations crumble from within long before external forces strike the final blow. Yet the Kali Yuga stands apart in one crucial way: its cyclical nature. While Western eschatology often views history as a one-way slide toward Armageddon, Hindu time loops like a wheel. Every descent contains the seeds of renewal. This perspective transforms despair into purpose. If our actions can deepen the darkness, they can also hasten the dawn. Contemporary Hindu leaders emphasize this nuance, framing climate activism and social justice not as hopeless battles, but as sacred obligations to tilt the balance. Which begs the question, does diagnosing an era as morally bankrupt become a self-fulfilling prophecy? When we label our times as irredeemably corrupt, do we absolve ourselves of striving for better? The Kali Yuga's most profound lesson might be this: prophecies about decline are only dangerous if they paralyze us. Those who wield it as a call to action prove that even in the darkest age, human agency remains the wild card the ancients couldn't fully predict. This theme of cyclical time reverberates far beyond India. From the Mayan calendar's great cycles to the Ouroboros serpent eating its own tail in Egyptian lore, civilizations have long whispered the same truth, that history rhymes more than it marches. Our next prophecy takes us to the misty highlands of Scotland, where a 16th century seer's visions still shape political debates today, proving that some predictions refuse to stay buried in the past. High in the mesas of Arizona, the Hopi elders have guarded a prophecy for centuries, a warning wrapped in the image of a celestial dancer. The blue star Kachina, they say, will appear in the sky when the world is most out of balance, its arrival heralding a time of purification so intense it will separate truth from illusion. But this isn't just a story about the end of days. It's a litmus test for how ancient wisdom collides with modern hunger for meaning. The prophecy's details are precise yet cryptic. When the blue star Kachina dances in the plaza of the heavens, the earth will tremble, societies will fracture, and those who cling to materialism will find themselves adrift. What makes this vision so magnetic isn't just its drama, but its flexibility. In the 1990s, ufologists claimed the blue star referred to the Hale-Bopp comet, its twin tails mirroring the Kachina's feathered regalia. New Age circles later reinterpreted it as a coded message about extraterrestrial intervention, blending Hopi tradition with channeled alien narratives. Even climate activists have adopted the prophecy, framing wildfires and floods as the first tremors of purification. This cultural borrowing raises thorny questions. For the Hopi, the blue star isn't a metaphor, it's a sacred covenant, part of a complex web of rituals meant to maintain cosmic harmony. Elders like Thomas Baniasia spent decades cautioning against cherry-picking indigenous prophecies for apocalyptic thrills. Yet the prophecy's spread reveals a universal human craving, the desire to see our chaotic present as part of a grand, preordained narrative. When people point to unusual atmospheric phenomena or geopolitical unrest as signs, they're not just predicting the future, they're trying to make sense of a world that feels increasingly untethered. The tension between tradition and adaptation plays out in real time. At Hopi cultural centers, guides explain the Kachina's original context, emphasizing its ties to seasonal cycles and moral accountability. Meanwhile, online forums buzz with theories linking the prophecy to everything from quantum physics to government conspiracies. This divide mirrors a larger pattern. Indigenous prophecies often get stripped of their cultural anchors when exported globally, becoming blank slates for outsiders' anxieties. Yet there's an unexpected upside to this cross-pollination. The very act of reimagining the Blue Star prophecy has sparked dialogues between Hopi leaders and scientists, artists, and environmentalists. What began as a tribal warning now echoes in international climate summits and documentary films, proving that some prophecies don't just predict change, they become catalysts for it. The Hopi don't claim to own the truth of what's coming. They simply remind us that every era gets the omens it deserves. This interplay between the ancient and the contemporary sets the stage for our next exploration, a prophecy born in the icy grip of Siberia, where a shaman's century-old vision of black snakes slithering across the land now fuels a modern battle for the soul of the earth itself. The line between prediction and parable blurs once more, revealing how deeply our myths shape the battles we choose to fight. The mist-shrouded hills of Britain still whisper Merlin's name, not just as a magician, but as the architect of destiny itself. His prophecies about King Arthur weren't mere fortune-telling. They wove a spell so potent it would shape kingdoms for centuries. According to Geoffrey of Monmouth's medieval chronicles, Merlin foresaw Arthur's birth as a beacon of hope, a boar of Cornwall who would unite the fractured isles. But here's the twist. The legend didn't just predict Arthur's rise, it actively constructed it. By the time Henry Tudor marched under the dragon banner of Cadwallader in 1485, claiming Arthur's bloodline to justify his claim to the throne, Merlin's words had transcended myth to become political artillery. What makes these prophecies so fascinating is their deliberate ambiguity. Merlin's visions, recorded in cryptic verses, could be stretched to fit almost any ruler's agenda. When Edward I sought to conquer Wales, he paraded Arthur's supposed crown jewels through London, proving his right to rule as the once and future king's heir. The message was clear. Prophecy wasn't history's shadow, it was its blueprint. Even the famous sword in the stone motif served a cunning purpose. By suggesting divine selection rather than bloodline alone determined legitimacy, it offered a loophole for usurpers to rebrand themselves as chosen ones. Yet the Arthurian cycle's true genius lies in its tragic arc. Merlin's predictions didn't stop at glory. They foretold betrayal at Camlan, Mordred's treachery, and Arthur's departure to Avalon. This duality gave the myth irresistible staying power. Medieval monarchs could cherry-pick the prophecy's triumphant elements, while ordinary people clung to the promise of Arthur's return in dark times. The legend became a Rorschach test. A rebellion leader might invoke Arthur as a champion of the oppressed, while a king framed him as the divine right incarnate. This blurring of history and myth raises a provocative question. Why do societies obsess over lost golden ages? Psychologists point to the nostalgia paradox, the way idealized pasts offer comfort in turbulent presents. For 6th century Britons reeling from Roman collapse, Arthur symbolized order amidst chaos. For Tudor England, he was proof of national exceptionalism. Today, the allure persists in politics and pop culture, from Excalibur-themed campaigns to Netflix reboots. The prophecy's power doesn't come from accuracy, but from its ability to morph with each generation's anxieties. As we'll see next, this pattern isn't unique to Britain. Across the world, nations have stitched their identities from prophetic cloth, turning seers into nation builders and myths into borders. But few prophecies have been as explosively political as the one we're about to explore. A vision that didn't just predict a nation's birth, but midwifed it through revolution and bloodshed. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, it didn't just claim lives, it warped reality itself. As entire towns collapsed under the weight of the plague, terrified survivors turned their eyes skyward, searching for answers in the stars. Astrologers pointed to a chilling celestial event, the conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in the sign of Aquarius in 1345, an alignment so rare it was said to herald catastrophe. But this wasn't just an observation, it became a self-fulfilling engine of hysteria. Once people believed the planets had ordained their suffering, they began seeing signs everywhere, from contaminated wells to the sudden flight of birds. And when fear reaches that fever pitch, it always demands a villain. The scapegoating unfolded with horrifying precision. Jewish communities, long accused of poisoning wells in anti-Semitic libels, bore the brunt of the violence. In Strasbourg, over 2,000 Jews were burned alive in a single day, their deaths justified as a purification against the plague. Lepers, foreigners, even midwives, anyone deemed unclean became a target. Here's the cruel irony: these pogroms often accelerated the plague's spread. As skilled Jewish doctors were murdered and marginalized groups fled into hiding, public health measures collapsed. The prophecy of planetary doom didn't just predict disaster, it created the very conditions that made disaster worse. Medieval minds weren't blindly superstitious, they were trapped in a feedback loop of dread. When the stars confirmed their worst fears, every misfortune reinforced the prophecy's power. Chroniclers wrote of rains turning to blood and spectral armies clashing in the clouds, descriptions less rooted in fact than in collective panic. This phenomenon, known today as apophenia, explains why humans see patterns in chaos, especially during crises. The more people expected omens, the more omens they found, and the more violently they acted to appease the imagined forces behind them. Modern pandemics reveal the same psychological trap. During the 2019 coronavirus outbreak, conspiracy theories linking the virus to 5G networks or bioweapon labs sparked arson and harassment. The details change, but the mechanism remains eerily identical. Fear distorts perception, perception justifies action, and action often worsens the very crisis people hope to escape. The Black Death's legacy isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a warning about how quickly prophecy and paranoia can intertwine, turning desperate societies against themselves. Yet there's a deeper lesson here about resilience. In the plague's aftermath, some European cities emerged stronger, reforming sanitation and labor laws. The stars hadn't changed, but human choices did, which raises a provocative thought. Perhaps the most dangerous prophecies aren't the ones written in the heavens, but the ones we etch into our own minds, mistaking fear for fate. As we'll see next, this dynamic plays out even in the most unexpected places like the glittering courts of Renaissance Europe, where a single astrologer's prediction would topple kings and redefine power. In the summer of 1945, a voice crackled across radios in war-ravaged Japan, a voice most citizens had never heard before. Emperor Hirohito's surrender speech marked more than the end of a war. It shattered a prophecy woven into the nation's bones for centuries. The idea that Japan's emperor descended from the sun goddess Amaterasu wasn't just folklore, it was state doctrine, a divine mandate that fueled kamikaze pilots and schoolchildren alike with unshakable conviction. But when Hirohito declared he was not a living god, the metaphysical foundations of an empire trembled. This seismic shift didn't happen in a vacuum. For generations, Shinto priests had curated rituals reinforcing the emperor's divinity, from secret accession ceremonies to the belief that his gaze could wither crops. During Japan's rapid militarization, this prophecy became a political weapon. Textbooks taught that dying for the emperor guaranteed spiritual ascension, while military leaders framed expansion as fulfilling the god's will. The infamous phrase, 100 million hearts beating as one, wasn't just propaganda, it was incantation, binding national identity to celestial destiny. Yet prophecy's power hinges on belief. As firebombs reduced Tokyo to ash and Hiroshima became a wasteland, the divine narrative strained. Survivors whispered about the emperor's inability to stop B-29 bombers, eroding faith in his supernatural protection. When American occupiers demanded Hirohito's renunciation, they weren't just dismantling a political system. They were performing metaphysical surgery, excising the prophecy that had animated Japanese imperialism. The aftermath reveals prophecy's fragility. Overnight, shrines switched from venerating the emperor as a deity to honoring him as a symbol, yet traces of the old belief persist. Right-wing factions still cling to pre-war mythology, while pacifist groups weaponize the renunciation to oppose remilitarization. This dichotomy begs the question, can a prophecy truly die, or does it merely mutate? Modern Japan offers a fascinating answer. The same culture that once worshipped emperors now venerates bullet trains and virtual idols, secular prophecies of progress. Economic forecasts and demographic projections have replaced divine mandates, yet they wield similar influence. When government warnings about a super-aged society spur young Japanese to avoid marriage, or when tech giants predict robot-dominated workforces, aren't these just new flavors of fate? This blurring of sacred and statistical futures sets the stage for our next exploration. Because whether it's gods or algorithms shaping our choices, the core mechanism remains unchanged. Humans will always chase narratives that promise meaning in chaos. And sometimes the most potent prophecies aren't etched in temple scrolls, but in lines of code and quarterly reports. Nostradamus sits in a dimly lit study, scrawling cryptic verses by candlelight, an image cemented in popular culture. But here's the paradox: the very obscurity of his 16th century quatrains is what made them immortal. Take his most famous prediction about a great terror descending from the sky in the year of the new century. After the September 11th attacks, believers pounced. Wasn't New York's skyline filled with smoke in 2001? Never mind that Nostradamus wrote in rhymes so vague they could apply to anything from volcanic eruptions to fireworks mishaps. The pattern repeats with eerie consistency. When supporters claim he foresaw Hitler's rise with phrases like Hister and the beast with two horns, they gloss over the fact that his original text describes events in the Balkans, not Germany. The wordplay is tempting until you realize Nostradamus used similar language for half a dozen historical figures. That's the seductive genius of his prophecies. They're Rorschach blots in verse, reflecting whatever crisis grabs headlines next. Why does this centuries-old game of Mad Libs still captivate us? Psychologists point to Barnum statements, a phrase is so general they feel personal. Nostradamus quatrains thrive on this effect, offering just enough specificity to seem relevant, the city by the sea, while leaving room for interpretation. In times of uncertainty, people crave narratives that impose order on chaos, even if that order is illusory. After the Kennedy assassination, devotees found references to the great man struck down in daylight. During the moon landing, verses about silvery globes suddenly made sense. The Nostradamus phenomenon mirrors modern conspiracy theories in unsettling ways. Both rely on selective attention, highlighting hits while ignoring countless misses. Both flourish in eras of social upheaval, offering grand explanations for random tragedies. and both exploit confirmation bias, where believers remember the one vague line that came true while forgetting hundreds that didn't. The difference: Nostradamus had the foresight to write in anagrams and archaic French, ensuring his words could be endlessly reinterpreted. Yet there's a darker undercurrent here. When we retrofit prophecies to fit events, we're not just playing with history, we're abdicating responsibility. If every disaster was foretold, then human error, greed, or negligence fade into the background. The rise of fascism becomes destiny, not the result of political failures. Terrorist attacks transform into cosmic inevitabilities rather than preventable security lapses. Nostradamus didn't just predict the future, he gave us an excuse to stop questioning it. This hunger for predestined narratives hasn't faded, it's migrated. Today's online conspiracy boards function like digital quatrains, where phrases about globalists or the deep state are just as malleable as Nostradamus rhymes. The medium has changed, but the mechanism remains identical. Strip away context, embrace ambiguity, and let fear do the rest. The next time someone claims a 16th century apothecary foresaw a modern catastrophe, ask yourself this: are we decoding a prophecy or just projecting our own anxieties onto the past? This blurring of hindsight and prediction isn't unique to Europe. Across the Pacific, an even older prophetic tradition thrived, one where celestial events didn't just foretell the future, but demanded action from those who dared to read the signs. The stakes: nothing less than the mandate to rule an entire civilization. The story begins with a tower, not just any tower, but a monument so audacious it threatened the heavens themselves. According to Genesis, the people of Babel sought to build a structure that would reach the sky, a symbol of human unity and ambition. But their dreams shattered when God confounded their speech, scattering them across the earth with languages so fragmented they could no longer understand one another. On the surface, this reads like a divine punishment, but dig deeper, and it reveals itself as something far more profound, a prophecy about the very nature of human conflict. Language divides as much as it connects. Think of the tensions in modern-day Belgium, where Flemish and French speakers navigate a delicate political dance, or the linguistic strife in Sri Lanka, where Sinhala and Tamil became markers of identity in a brutal civil war. The Tower of Babel's curse isn't just about miscommunication, it's about the way language becomes a weapon, a tool to exclude, to other, to define who belongs and who doesn't. Even today, debates over official languages ignite passions, from Spanish in American classrooms to Mandarin in Hong Kong streets. The biblical warning echoes: when words fail, violence often follows. Yet globalization throws a wrench into this ancient prophecy. With English as the lingua franca of business, emojis bridging textual gaps, and AI translation erasing barriers in real time, are we reversing the curse or fulfilling it in unexpected ways? Some argue that universal communication tools create a new Babel, one where superficial understanding masks deeper cultural rifts. Others see hope in technology's ability to preserve dying languages while fostering dialogue. The irony is palpable. The same tools that could unite us also risk homogenizing the very diversity that makes human expression rich. This tension between unity and division isn't just linguistic, it's woven into the fabric of civilization itself. From the tribal allegiances of ancient Mesopotamia to the algorithmic echo chambers of social media, the story of Babel is a blueprint for how societies fracture. And as we'll see next, some prophecies don't just predict these fractures, they weaponize them, turning cultural memory into a catalyst for rebellion. The line between curse and destiny has never been thinner. Long before climate activists marched with signs about saving the planet, An ancient Persian prophecy laid out the blueprint for ecological renewal, and it all hinges on a single, world-shattering battle. The Zoroastrian concept of Frashokereti doesn't just predict the end of the world. It demands humanity's active participation in its rebirth. Picture this: after millennia of struggle between light and darkness, the forces of Ahura Mazda will finally triumph over Angra Mainyu, purifying the earth in a river of molten metal. But here's the radical twist: this isn't a passive waiting game. Every act of environmental stewardship, every choice to live in harmony with nature, is believed to hasten the dawn of this renewed world. Modern environmentalists might not invoke Zoroastrian cosmology in their TD talks, but the parallels are striking. The Frashokereti prophecy insists that renewal isn't possible without destruction, a notion echoed in today's debates about controlled burns in forestry or the collapse of unsustainable industries. In Mumbai, Parsi communities still practice ritual tree planting as a sacred duty tied to this eschatology, while scholars point out how ancient Persian water management systems, designed to honor the purity of the elements, rival modern sustainability models. This isn't just mythology, it's a 2,000-year-old call to arms disguised as destiny. What sets Frashokereti apart from other apocalyptic visions is its inherent optimism. Unlike doomsday scenarios that spiral into nihilism, this prophecy frames catastrophe as a necessary crucible for transformation. Contemporary movements like Extinction Rebellion tap into the same psychological lever. Their protests aren't just about averting collapse, but about building something better in its wake. The Zoroastrian emphasis on individual responsibility resonates powerfully in an age of carbon footprints and ethical consumerism. When a teenager chooses a reusable water bottle or a CEO pivots to renewable energy, they're unwittingly channeling the same ethos that once inspired Persian farmers to rotate crops as a spiritual act. Yet the prophecy's real genius lies in its flexibility. For urban activists, the molten metal purification might symbolize the dismantling of corrupt systems. For scientists, it mirrors the concept of planetary boundaries, the idea that Earth can only absorb so much abuse before tipping into a new state. Even the cosmic battle between light and darkness finds eerie parallels in modern struggles between renewable energy and fossil fuel lobbies. The prophecy persists because it's not a fixed script, but a mirror reflecting each generation's most pressing battles. This interplay between ancient prophecy and modern action raises a provocative question. Do we fight harder for the future when we believe it's preordained, or when we realize it's anything but? The answer might lie in the stories we tell ourselves. When Greta Thunberg declares, "Our house is on fire," she's not quoting Zoroaster, but she's harnessing the same narrative power, the ability to turn abstract threats into urgent, winnable wars. The Frashokereti isn't just a prediction, it's a psychological tool, one that transforms overwhelm into agency by framing the unthinkable as inevitable. And the inevitable as something we can hurry along. As we pivot from prophecies of environmental reckoning to those of societal transformation, consider this: the most enduring predictions aren't the ones that paralyze us with fear, but the ones that hand us a role in the story. From the Persian plains to the halls of the United Nations, the line between prophecy and progress has always been thinner than we think. The chill of 17th century Massachusetts wasn't just in the air, it was in the whispers. When young Betty Paris and Abigail Williams began convulsing uncontrollably in Salem village, the diagnosis came swift and certain: witchcraft. But this wasn't just a medical mystery, it was the spark that ignited a prophecy of doom, one the Puritans had been rehearsing for generations. Their belief that Satan walked among them, corrupting the godly, wasn't abstract theology, it was a ticking time bomb. and when the girls pointed fingers at Tituba, an enslaved woman from Barbados, the fuse was lit. What followed wasn't just justice, it was a self-fulfilling nightmare where the mere act of accusation became proof of guilt. The trials unfolded like a grotesque play where everyone knew their lines. Spectral evidence, visions only the afflicted could see, was admissible in court. Confessions extracted under duress were treated as gospel truth. Neighbors turned on neighbors, dredging up old grudges under the guise of divine duty. The terrifying brilliance of this system lay in its circular logic. If you denied being a witch, you were lying a trait of the possessed, but if you confessed, you sealed your fate. There was no escape, only the relentless machinery of a prophecy fulfilling itself. By the time the hysteria burned out, 19 people had been hanged, one pressed to death with stones, and countless lives shattered. This wasn't just superstition run amok, it was fear weaponized. Puritan ministers had long preached that the end times were near, with New England as the final battleground between Christ and Antichrist. When strange fits gripped the village, it wasn't just illness they saw, it was the fulfillment of their darkest sermons. Historians now recognize the trials as a perfect storm: frontier isolation, property disputes, and the repressed anxieties of a society terrified of its own shadows. The girls' accusations didn't create the panic, they gave it a script. Modern parallels lurk uncomfortably close. From McCarthy-era communist hunts to viral social media witch trials, the same ingredients reappear: vague threats, moral absolutism, and the intoxicating rush of collective righteousness. The Salem tragedy teaches us that prophecies of evil don't just predict persecution, they license it. When we're convinced monsters walk among us, we'll always find the monsters we expect. Yet Salem's legacy isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a roadmap for resistance. The trials ended when respected figures like Increase Mather dared to question the very evidence they'd once sanctified, declaring, "It were better that 10 witches escape than one innocent person suffer." That shift from certainty to skepticism is the antidote to prophecy's poison, because the darkest prophecies aren't the ones spoken by seers, but the ones we whisper to ourselves in the dark, mistaking fear for truth. As we'll see next, this dance between panic and reason doesn't just shape courtrooms, it builds and topples empires. Rasputin's eyes, dark and unblinking, seemed to hold the Romanovs in a trance long before his words sealed their fate. The so-called Mad Monk didn't just predict the fall of Russia's imperial family, he became the living embodiment of their impending doom. His prophecy was chillingly simple: "If I die by the hands of peasants, the Tsar will keep his throne. But if the nobility kills me, the dynasty will not outlive me by 2 years." When a group of aristocrats finally poisoned, shot, and drowned him in December 1916, they didn't just murder a man, they set in motion a countdown to revolution. The irony is almost too perfect. Rasputin's influence over Tsar Nicholas and Empress Alexandra had already eroded the monarchy's legitimacy. His rumored affair with the Tsarina, his grip over the hemophiliac heir's medical treatments, even his drunken escapades that scandalized Petrograd. But it was his death that transformed him from a scandalous footnote into a martyr for the coming storm. Workers and soldiers, already seething over food shortages and wartime failures, saw his killing as proof the aristocracy was rotten to its core. The prophecy didn't just foresee the Romanovs' fall, it gave the masses a narrative to justify it. Historians still debate whether Rasputin possessed genuine mystical insight or simply understood the power of theater. His infamous survival of initial assassination attempts, eating cyanide-laced cakes unharmed, shrugging off gunshot wounds, read like a scripted drama, amplifying his myth. Yet the deeper truth lies in how both his life and death exposed the fragility of autocracy. The Tsar's reliance on a peasant mystic undermined the divine right of kings, while the brutality of his murder laid bare the nobility's desperation. Prophecy here wasn't magic, it was a spotlight illuminating cracks in the empire's foundation. Rebels seized this symbolism with ruthless efficiency. Bolshevik pamphlets recast Rasputin's death as the first act in a predestined revolution, his corpse a harbinger of the Tsar's fate. Even the timing felt scripted. Within months of his murder, Nicholas abdicated, and by July 1918, the entire Romanov family was executed in a basement in Yekaterinburg. The prophecy's real power wasn't in its accuracy, but in how it framed chaos as inevitability. People could endure hardship if they believed it led somewhere, especially if that somewhere was written in the stars. This alchemy of charisma and catastrophe isn't unique to Russia. From the French Revolution's cult of Rousseau to modern conspiracy theories painting elites as puppeteers, movements thrive when they wrap political grievances in prophetic language. Rasputin's story reveals a universal truth. The most potent revolutions aren't just fought in streets, but in imaginations where the line between prediction and propaganda blurs into oblivion. And as we'll see next, this dance of destiny and descent doesn't just topple thrones, it builds new nations from the ashes. Deep in the cane fields of colonial Haiti, a whisper slithered between the enslaved, a warning that death wasn't the end of suffering. The zombie curse, or zombie in Haitian Creole, wasn't just superstition. It was a psychological shackle forged in the fires of brutality. Enslavers didn't just break bodies, they weaponized the afterlife itself, spreading terror that even in death, the enslaved could be resurrected as mindless laborers. This wasn't folklore, it was social control disguised as prophecy. The zombie myth roots coil around the transatlantic slave trade's darkest corners. African spiritual traditions of ancestral spirits collided with European fever dreams about voodoo, twisted by colonists to justify their cruelty. French plantation owners spun tales of sorcerers or bocas who could trap souls in lifeless bodies, a grotesque metaphor for slavery's dehumanization. But here's the chilling twist. The enslaved didn't just fear zombification. Some came to believe it was real. Oral histories recount plantation workers avoiding rebellion or suicide, terrified their masters would summon them back as zombies to toil eternally. The prophecy didn't just predict suffering, it enforced it. Modern anthropology reveals the curse's grim mechanics. Tetrodotoxin, a poison found in pufferfish used in secret rituals, could induce death-like comas, while psychoactive datura plants left victims in suggestible trances. Colonial accounts of zombie attacks often traced back to escaped slaves, their minds fractured by trauma or toxins, wandering in confusion. The line between myth and reality blurred so completely that even early 20th century ethnographers like Zora Neale Hurston documented cases of Haitians identifying neighbors as zombies. Yet the zombie's evolution from colonial terror to pop culture icon is where the prophecy truly metastasized. George Romero's nightmarish ghouls in Night of the Living Dead didn't just borrow Haitian lore, they rebranded it for the atomic age, swapping bocas for radiation and slave plantations for shopping malls. Today's zombie apocalypses still echo the original curse's themes: loss of autonomy, relentless labor, and the dread of becoming what you fear. Video games like Resident Evil and shows like The Walking Dead aren't just entertainment. They're secular prophecies, rehearsing societal collapses where the masses transform into mindless consumers or consumed. This transformation raises a provocative question. When folklore migrates into mass media, does it lose its power or gain new potency? The Haitian zombie began as a tool of oppression, but in retelling, it became a mirror for modern anxieties about pandemics, capitalism, even technology's grip on our attention. The curse outlived the plantations because it was always more than a story. It was a warning about how easily humanity can be stripped away, and warnings, as we'll see next, come in many forms. From the cane fields of the Caribbean to the neon glow of Hollywood, prophecies adapt, but their grip on our imagination never loosens. The final prophecies we'll explore don't just haunt cultures, they rewrite reality itself, bending nations to their will with nothing but ink and belief. The clock ticked toward midnight on December 31st, 1999, and the world held its breath, not for fireworks but for digital Armageddon. The Y2K bug wasn't just a glitch, it was a prophecy of collapse written in lines of outdated code. Computer systems, programmed to recognize years as 2 digits, were expected to misinterpret 00 as 1900 instead of 2000, triggering bank failures, plane crashes, even nuclear meltdown. But what began as a technical footnote spiraled into a trillion-dollar frenzy of panic and preparation. Governments formed task forces, companies hired armies of programmers, and survivalists stockpiled canned goods like the apocalypse was a certainty, not a maybe. Here's the twist: when the clock struck 12 and the lights stayed on, the world didn't breathe a sigh of relief, it scoffed. The Y2K bug became a punchline, proof that doomsayers had cried wolf. But that dismissal misses the chilling truth. The disaster didn't happen because we believed it would. The frantic debugging, the software patches, the sleepless nights of IT teams, these weren't overreactions, they were the firewall against catastrophe. Like a prophecy whispered so loudly it scared away its own fulfillment, the Y2K panic didn't fail, it worked too well. This paradox echoes through modern tech anxieties. Today's warnings about artificial intelligence, the singularity, job displacement, even robot uprisings follow the same script. Skeptics roll their eyes, insisting fear outstrips reality. But just as with Y2K, the act of preparation alters the outcome. Ethical AI guidelines, regulatory frameworks, and public discourse aren't just reactions to hypotheticals. They're the patches ensuring the prophecy stays fictional. The lesson isn't that prophecies are wrong, it's that they're tools. When we take them seriously, we rewrite their endings. Yet technology amplifies prophecies' reach in unsettling new ways. Social media algorithms feed on engagement, turning niche warnings into viral certainties. A single tweet about an asteroid collision or a rogue AI can spiral into mainstream panic before fact-checkers blink. The Y2K bug spread through newspapers and government reports. Today's digital prophecies move at the speed of retweets, leaving even less room for course correction. So did Y2K prove prophecies powerless or reveal their evolution? The answer lies in the space between prediction and prevention. Ancient oracles demanded animal sacrifices. Modern ones demand line-by-line code reviews. The medium changes, but the mechanism remains. Belief shapes behavior, and behavior shapes destiny. As we hurtle toward the next technological horizon, one thing is certain: the prophecies aren't getting quieter. They're just learning to speak in ones and zeros. The elders spoke of a vision long before the soldiers came, a prophecy whispered through generations of Cherokee storytellers about a great serpent that would one day coil around their land, squeezing until the people were forced to walk a trail stained with tears. When Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act became law in 1830, that serpent took the form of bayonets and broken treaties. But what makes this tragedy more than just a historical atrocity is how deeply prophecy shaped its unfolding. The Cherokee weren't just victims of policy, they were prisoners of a narrative that had been foretold, a destiny some fought to resist and others reinterpreted to survive. At first, the signs seemed manageable. Cherokee leaders like Sequoyah had embraced literacy, creating a written syllabary to preserve their language. They built schools, adopted constitutional government, even won legal battles in the U.S. Supreme Court. Yet none of it mattered when gold was discovered on their land and the prophecy's shadow grew darker. The elders' warnings about displacement weren't passive predictions, they were urgent calls to adapt. Some Cherokee saw the writing on the wall and voluntarily relocated west. Others, like Chief John Ross, fought removal through every legal channel, believing the prophecy could be averted. Their efforts only delayed the inevitable. In 1838, federal troops rounded up over 16,000 Cherokee at gunpoint, forcing them into stockades with only the clothes on their backs. The Trail of Tears had begun. Here's where the prophecy's cruel duality emerges. The very act of warning about displacement made some Cherokee hesitant to resist militarily, trusting instead in diplomacy that ultimately failed them. Meanwhile, white settlers justified removal by twisting Christian eschatology, framing Native Americans as obstacles to America's manifest destiny. Both sides were acting out scripted roles, one trying to outrun a prophecy, the other weaponizing a different one. By the time the last survivors stumbled into Oklahoma, nearly 4,000 had perished from exposure, disease, and starvation. The serpent had swallowed its fill, yet prophecies like rivers find new channels. In Oklahoma, Cherokee elders began teaching that the trail wasn't just an ending, but a trial that would lead to renewal. The Great Purification prophecies spoke of a time when the people would regain strength, blending tradition with resilience. Today, that reinterpretation lives in the Cherokee Nation's revival. Their language programs, their thriving cultural centers, even their representation in Congress. The original prophecy of displacement wasn't wrong, it was incomplete. The full vision required generations to unfold. This pattern of destruction and reinvention isn't unique to the Cherokee. Across the world, prophecies of displacement have served both as warnings and lifelines for the Maori during British colonization, the Armenians in the shadow of genocide, even modern Syrians fleeing civil war. What begins as a forecast of loss often transforms into a roadmap for survival. The next prophecy we'll explore takes this idea further, showing how visions of exile can sometimes hide blueprints for return written not in ink, but in the stars themselves. In the heart of Islamic tradition lies a prophecy so potent it has shaped empires and ignited revolutions. The coming of the Mahdi, a messianic figure destined to bring justice to a world drowning in corruption. Sunni and Shia traditions paint strikingly similar portraits, a righteous leader emerging in humanity's darkest hour, filling the earth with equity as it had been filled with oppression. But beneath this shared hope lies a fault line of interpretation, one that has fueled both spiritual longing and geopolitical turmoil for centuries. For Shia Muslims, the Mahdi is the 12th Imam Muhammad al-Mahdi, who vanished in the 9th century and will return from occultation when God decrees. His arrival is tied to cosmic signs, the sun rising in the west, the Euphrates drying to reveal mountains of gold, but also to human readiness. This belief isn't passive, it's a call to action. Iran's Islamic revolution drew heavily on modest imagery, with Ayatollah Khomeini's supporters framing their struggle as paving the way for the Imam's return. Even today, Shia militias in Iraq and Syria invoke the Mahdi's name, viewing their battles as part of a divine countdown. Sunni traditions, while equally vivid, lack centralized authority around the Mahdi's identity. Some hadiths describe him as a descendant of the Prophet ruling for 7 years, others as a humble figure emerging from chaos. This ambiguity has made Sunni Mahdism a double-edged sword. In the 19th century, Sudanese leader Muhammad Ahmad declared himself the Mahdi, rallying thousands against British colonialism only for his movement to collapse after his unexpected death. Modern extremist groups like ISIS have exploited similar narratives, twisting prophecies to justify brutality, claiming their caliphate was the promised Islamic state preceding the Mahdi's arrival. Political weight of these beliefs can't be overstated. When Saudi Arabia and Iran vie for influence, they're not just clashing over oil or territory, they're wrestling over competing visions of the end times. Satellite channels across the Middle East dissect current events through apocalyptic lenses, debating whether rising food prices or drone strikes fulfill ancient signs. This isn't mere speculation, it shapes policy. Billions are spent preparing for imagined scenarios, from underground bunkers in Riyadh to Hezbollah's missile stockpiles, all justified as preparations for the Mahdi's era. Yet the line between faith and fanaticism is perilously thin. Mainstream scholars emphasize the Mahdi's role as a unifier, not a warlord, warning against self-appointed claimants. The tragedy unfolds when desperation turns prophecy into license, when the longing for justice becomes a pretext for violence. History's darkest chapters remind us that messianic fervor, untethered from humility, can justify almost anything in the name of hastening salvation. This tension between hope and hubris isn't unique to Islam. From Jewish anticipation of the Moshiach to Christian visions of the Second Coming, messianic prophecies share a haunting pattern. The deeper the despair, the brighter the promised Savior shines. In Venezuela, Hugo Chávez's supporters hailed him as a modern-day Bolivar, a liberator foretold. In Japan, new religions blend Buddhist and Shinto prophecies of a future king. Even secular movements echo the template, with political figures cast as destined heroes who will reset broken systems. What unites these threads is humanity's refusal to accept chaos as permanent. The Mahdi, like all messianic figures, represents the ultimate counter-narrative, proof that oppression isn't final, that history has a destination. But therein lies the danger and the beauty. Prophecies don't just predict the future, they reveal what we value enough to imagine changing. And as we'll see next, sometimes the most transformative visions aren't about saviors at all, but about ordinary people who rewrite destiny simply by daring to believe differently. Standing in a dimly bathroom with nothing but a candle flickering against the mirror, countless children have whispered, "Bloody Mary," 3 times, half daring the legend to be true, half terrified it might be. This modern ritual isn't just a sleepover game. It's a living example of how prophecies don't need ancient scrolls or sacred texts to endure. They thrive on something far more primal, the collective imagination of each new generation. The rules vary. Sometimes it's 13 chants, sometimes a spinning candle, but the core remains unchanged. Face your reflection, summon the specter of a vengeful woman, and brace for her ghostly hands to reach through the glass. What's fascinating isn't whether Mary exists, but why this particular myth persists when so many others fade. Psychologists point to the ritual's perfect storm of psychological triggers. The mirror, a boundary between reality and illusion, taps into our innate fear of doppelgangers and distorted identities. The darkness heightens sensory awareness, making every creak or flicker feel intentional. And the act of repetition, those 3 whispered calls, creates a hypnotic tension, a buildup that primes the mind for panic. It's no accident that this prophecy flourishes in childhood. Kids exist in a liminal space where logic and wonder collide, where a darkened bathroom might as well be a haunted cathedral. But the real magic lies in the storytelling. Unlike static prophecies carved in stone, Bloody Mary evolves with each retelling. One version claims she's a grieving mother searching for her lost child. Another insists she's a witch executed centuries ago. In some schools, she's a girl who died in a locker room hazing incident, her spirit bound to the mirrors where she once gazed. This adaptability is key. The prophecy molds itself to local fears. wrapping urban legends in communal shivers. When a group of friends emerges unscathed from the ritual, the story grows. When one swears they saw a shadow move, the legend solidifies. Collective belief isn't just sustaining the myth, it's feeding it new details like kindling to a flame. This oral tradition isn't unique to bathroom mirrors. From campfire tales to viral creepypastas, prophecies spread fastest when they're whispered, not written. There's intimacy in spoken warnings, a thrill in leaning closer to hear the next chilling detail. It's how legends like Slender Man leap from niche forums to global panic, or how a 19th century murder ballad like The Trois Sisters morphs into 100 regional ghost stories. The Bloody Mary ritual taps into the same ancient impulse that had our ancestors huddled around fires, passing down prophecies of floods and famines, except now, the firelight is a smartphone screen and the cave walls are TikTok videos. As we approach the final prophecy, consider this. The most enduring predictions aren't the ones etched in temple walls, but the ones that live in the spaces between words, in the pauses between breaths. They're the stories we tell in hushed tones, the ones that make us glance over our shoulders even as we laugh them off. Because whether it's a phantom in a mirror or a king's downfall foretold by the stars, prophecies survive not by being true, but by being told again and again and again. And sometimes the most powerful ones aren't about the future at all, but about the fears we can't quite leave behind. Scientists call it the hothouse Earth scenario, a domino effect where rising temperatures trigger irreversible feedback loops, melting permafrost releasing methane, dying forests becoming carbon emitters, ice sheets vanishing to reveal heat-absorbing oceans. But strip away the technical jargon, and what remains is eerily familiar: a prophecy, not etched on temple walls or whispered by oracles, but printed in IPCC reports and projected onto climate graphs with chilling precision. The numbers tell a story we've heard before: act now or face catastrophe. Yet this time, the prophecy isn't handed down by the gods, it's being written in real time by human hands. What makes climate warnings unique isn't just their global scale, but their paradoxical nature. Unlike ancient doomsayers, modern climatologists don't want their predictions to come true. Their equations spell out disaster not to revel in inevitability, but to shatter it. When James Hansen testified before Congress in 1988 about the greenhouse effect, he wasn't foretelling an unchangeable future. He was issuing a challenge. This is prophecy stripped of mysticism, where the seer is a supercomputer and the divine sign is a ppm reading of atmospheric CO2. Yet denial thrives in the same fertile ground that once nourished belief. Just as medieval peasants might dismiss a soothsayer's warning of plague, modern skeptics reframe climate data as alarmist fiction. Oil lobbyists borrow from the playbook of ancient court priests, dismissing uncomfortable truths as doom-mongering. The parallels are unsettling. When a 17th century farmer ignored a priest's warning of impending famine, he starved. When a 21st century policymaker ignores flood zone projections, entire cities drown. The stakes have changed, but the human reflex to resist inconvenient futures remains stubbornly intact. Policy decisions reveal prophecy's self-fulfilling power in stark relief. Nations investing heavily in renewables like Denmark's wind farms or Costa Rica's reforestation aren't just preparing for climate change, they're actively unraveling its worst predictions. Conversely, regions doubling down on fossil fuels aren't merely ignoring warnings, they're amplifying them, locking in emissions that will haunt generations. This is prophecy as choice, not fate. The infamous business-as-usual climate models aren't forecasts. They're mirrors reflecting our collective decisions back at us with mathematical clarity. Perhaps the most radical break from tradition lies in accountability. Ancient prophecies offered scapegoats, angry deities, cursed bloodlines, celestial alignments. Climate science offers no such comforts. There's no volcano god to appease with sacrifices, only spreadsheet cells waiting to be filled with either emissions or solutions. This unnerving absence of cosmic blame may explain why some cling to conspiracy theories. It's easier to imagine a cabal of weather-controlling elites than accept that the thermostat is in all our hands. The tipping point metaphor itself is a narrative masterstroke, a secular equivalent of the biblical point of no return. But unlike Ragnarök or the Kali Yuga, this prophecy's expiration date isn't written in mythic time. It ticks away in grant proposals and corporate boardrooms, in every vote cast and every product purchased. Which raises a possibility our ancestors never entertained. What if the most powerful prophecies aren't those that terrify us into submission, but those that galvanize us into rewriting them? The data may set the stage, but humanity holds the pen, and for the first time in history, we're writing the ending together. From the oracles of Delphi, whispering riddles that toppled kings, to the modern algorithms predicting our every click, these 25 prophecies reveal an unnerving truth. The moment we believe in a vision of the future, we start building it with our own hands. Whether it's Oedipus fleeing his fate only to sprint into its arms, or entire civilizations like the Vikings and the Aztecs reshaping their cultures around impending doom, the pattern is undeniable. Belief doesn't just anticipate destiny, it architects it. Look closer and the parallels become spine-chilling. Ambiguity is the prophet's greatest tool. The oracle of Delphi's vague warnings, Nostradamus's elastic quatrains, even the Y2K bug's nebulous threats, they all thrive on our hunger to fill in the blanks. And once we do, we act. Kings march to war, peasants revolt, programmers scramble to rewrite code, all because someone convinced us the script was already written. The most potent prophecies aren't the ones carved in stone. They're the ones etched into collective imagination, where fear and hope twist them into reality. Yet here's the twist: this power isn't a curse, it's a choice. The Cherokee transformed their Trail of Tears prophecy from a death sentence into a survival guide. Zoroastrians turned apocalyptic visions into environmental mandates. Even the Hopi's blue star Kachina, once a warning, now sparks global dialogues about healing the earth. The difference between a self-fulfilling doom and a self-fulfilling renaissance lies in who holds the pen. So what prophecies are we writing today? Climate reports that paralyze or mobilize, AI doomsday scenarios that justify surveillance or inspire ethical innovation. The algorithms nudging us toward division, are they predictions or blueprints? History whispers a warning. The stories we tell about tomorrow aren't just forecasts. They're invitations. Now it's your turn. Share the prophecies woven into your culture's fabric, the tales your grandparents whispered, the modern myths buzzing through your feed. Let's unravel them together, not as passive believers, but as authors. Because in the end, the ancient sages and Silicon Valley futurists agree on one thing: the future isn't a distant shore we're sailing toward. It's the very ground we're standing on, shaping beneath our feet with every choice. Or as the visionary Peter Drucker once put it, the best way to predict the future is to create it. So what will